Only I came to my husband's funeral. Not our son, not our daughter, not a single grandchild. Just me, standing by his coffin while the cold wind whipped through the chapel courtyard as if even the weather couldn't bear to stay. The funeral director looked uncomfortable, his eyes flicking between the empty seats in my face. He cleared his throat once, then again. "Would you like us to wait a few more minutes, Mrs. Holloway?" "No," I said. "Start." George would have hated a delay. He was punctual even in his last days, taking pills by the clock, watching the evening news at 6 sharp, folding his slippers side by side before bed. A man of habit, a man of dignity, and now a man laid to rest alone. I sat in the front row, all 5 chairs around me empty. The pastor recited scripture without conviction. The flowers were too bright, the casket too polished. I couldn't stop thinking how George would have laughed at the fuss, and then glanced around, frowning, asking where the hell the kids were. Where were they? A message had come that morning. Our son Peter sent a one-liner. "Sorry, Mom. Something came up. Can't make it." No explanation, no call. I imagined him at his office, or more likely on a golf course with clients, pretending not to feel the weight of the day, pretending his father's death was just a small event in a busy calendar. Our daughter, Celia, hadn't messaged at all. She'd left a voicemail 2 days earlier, breezy as a spring wind. "Mom, I really can't cancel my nail appointment, and you know how anxious I get with reschedules. Tell Dad I'll visit him next week." Next week? As if dead men wait? After the service, I walked alone behind the pallbearers. I didn't cry, not because I wasn't grieving. I had been grieving for months, but because there's a kind of sorrow so deep, it sits motionless inside you like an anchor. And that day, I was already buried under it. The cemetery was nearly deserted. One old groundskeeper watched from a distance, hand resting on a spade. The coffin was lowered, the prayers whispered. Dust met wood, wood met silence. I stood a while after the others left. My heels sunk slightly into the earth, and I felt the wind catch my coat. The headstone would be placed later. For now, a simple plaque with George's name. George Holloway, beloved husband, father, forgotten. The words stuck in my mind like a stone in a shoe. Forgotten. Back at home, the quiet roared. His recliner sat untouched, his slippers side by side, the TV remote where he last left it. I stared at it for a long time. Then I walked to the kitchen, opened a bottle of wine, a good one, from the cabinet I always saved for guests, and poured a glass. I took out my phone and opened Instagram. I don't often scroll, but something told me to look. Celia's profile was public, of course. She had posted 2 hours ago a picture of her and 3 girlfriends, drinks in hand, mid-laugh. Caption, "Girls' brunch, bottomless mimosas, living our best lives." Peter had posted too, a snapshot of the 9th hole, his new driver glinting in the sun. Killer swing, perfect weather, deals made. I stared at the screen until it blurred. Then I turned off the phone, took another sip of wine, and stared at the photo on the wall. George and me on our 40th anniversary, standing beside the rose bushes he planted with his own hands. They used to bloom in red. Now, they were bare. Tomorrow, I thought, I'll call the lawyer. I'll make changes quietly, with the same dignity George lived with. Because if I was the only one to show up for his last goodbye, I would be the only one to carry out his final will. And theirs. That evening, I sat alone in our kitchen, The same room where George used to peel apples with the precision of a surgeon, slicing them into neat little crescents and lining them on a plate. He'd always offer me the best piece, the one with the most sunshine, he called it. Now, the fruit bowl sat untouched, a couple of overripe pears sagging under their own skin. The silence wasn't unfamiliar. George had been gone for nearly 2 weeks before the funeral, and those days had already started teaching me the shape of solitude. But tonight, it pressed harder, louder, crueler. I couldn't stop thinking about the empty chairs, about Celia's message, or rather the absence of it. I had raised a daughter who could watch her father be lowered into a ground from the comfort of a brunch table. Had I failed her? Or had she failed something inside herself that could no longer be recovered? Peter's text was still there. No punctuation, no warmth, just a flat rejection in black and white. Something came up. Was it shame, indifference, or the kind of casual cruelty you don't even recognize until it's too late? I poured another glass of wine, not out of sorrow, but out of clarity. I walked down the hallway to our bedroom, opened the top drawer of George's desk. His things were still organized the same way: envelopes, spare keys, an old stamp book. I reached behind the files and pulled out the folder I kept hiding behind everything else. Thin, neat, sealed with a rubber band. It was labeled Estate. Inside were copies of our will, a list of beneficiaries, our instructions for what should happen to the house, the car, the accounts, even the antique clock George's grandfather had brought from Dublin. Everything had been prepared, reviewed by our lawyer 2 years ago with love and foresight. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened the file. Peter was listed as co-beneficiary of the main investment account, the one that held nearly $300,000 accumulated over a lifetime of work and frugal choices. He and Celia were both included in the house transfer clause. Even the lake cabin, the one they never visited anymore, but always asked about when taxes came due, was earmarked for them. I held the pages in my hand, my fingers trembling, not from age, but from something deeper. Betrayal has a pulse, and mine was thudding in my ears. I rose and walked to the closet, pulling out a canvas storage bin. Inside were all the old photos, family reunions, birthdays, holidays, George holding the kids when they were small, me on the porch laughing, Celia tugging at my sleeve, Peter asleep in George's lap, a book fallen open across his chest. We were a family. And maybe I had been too naive to see how far that family had drifted. Maybe love doesn't erode in a storm. Maybe it fades like wallpaper in the sun, quietly, until one day you no longer recognize the pattern. I picked up a photo of George and Peter fishing. Peter must have been 12. George had his arm around him, pointing at something in the water, his smile full and soft. That man deserved more than an empty chapel. I put the photo down. Then I picked up the phone. It was nearly midnight, but I didn't care. I called Thomas Fields, our lawyer. It went to voicemail as expected. I left a message anyway. Thomas, it's May Holloway. I need to revise my will urgently. Call me in the morning. I ended the call and stood for a long moment by the window. The moonlight touched the top of the rose bushes outside. They had withered since George passed, not from neglect, but as in sympathy. I knew I should prune them, give them room to bloom again, but not tonight. Tonight, I let the old petals fall. Tomorrow, I would begin cutting out what no longer belonged. The file cabinet in the hallway had 3 drawers, all labeled in George's steady block print: house, taxes, family. The last one was mine. I opened it slowly, the metal groaning a little, as if reluctant to give up its ghosts. Inside, folders upon folders, receipts, copies of checks, letters from banks, old Christmas cards tucked in between loan agreements. I had kept everything, not out of obsession, but because I believed in clarity. Paper doesn't lie, and that drawer had enough truth to light a forest fire. I sat down at the kitchen table, set the folder labeled Peter, Education and Business, to one side, and opened Celia, Home and Lifestyle. The handwriting was mine, neater years ago, still legible now. I started reading.
A child in sight? A stack of legal documents doesn't scare you. Nothing trivial can reach you after that. As we neared the end, Thomas looked up from his desk again. May, I have to say, this isn't something many people your age do so cleanly. Most want to forgive, to keep the peace. I've kept the peace for 80 years, I said quietly, and it buried me long before it buried George. He didn't ask any more questions. By the time I left the office, the sun was just beginning to stretch across the sidewalk. I stood outside a moment, letting the October air hit my face. I wasn't sad. I wasn't angry anymore either. I was simply done. Done waiting for my children to be people they never intended to become. Done mistaking duty for love. Done writing checks with my heart and expecting anything in return but silence. The call came just after noon, a voice I hadn't heard in months. Soft, almost tentative. Grandma? Ethan? I closed the ledger in front of me. I'd been reviewing the utility bills, preparing to close out some services on the lake cabin, the one Peter never used, but always called an asset. It wasn't an asset anymore. Not to him. Hello, darling, I said, careful to keep my voice steady. Everything all right? A pause. Then, I heard about Grandpa. I'm sorry I didn't call sooner. I waited, not because I wanted to punish him, but because I needed to hear whether the next words were genuine. I didn't know he passed until 2 days ago, Ethan said quickly. Mom never told me. She said he was sick, but not that he was gone. I sat very still. He passed almost 3 weeks ago, Ethan. I know, he whispered. I'm sorry. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I heard something in his silence. Not guilt exactly, but grief. The real kind. The kind you can't fake. I wanted to come see you, he added. If that's okay? I exhaled. Of course it's okay. He arrived an hour later, taller than I remembered, a little unshaven, smelling faintly of clean laundry and stress. He hugged me the way young people do when they're not sure if they're still welcome. One arm slightly unsure, then all in once they realize you don't pull away. I didn't pull away. We sat in the living room. I poured him lemonade, and he looked around like the house was both familiar and different. That's how grief feels, I suppose. You recognize everything, but it no longer belongs to the same world. I missed his funeral, he said, and I'll never forgive myself for that. You weren't the one who chose to miss it, I said gently. He looked at me then, really looked. Did Mom really not come? I nodded once. He didn't say anything, just stared down at the coaster under his glass, running his thumb along its frayed edge. She told me they had work, he said after a while, that it was handled. I should have known better. You know now. I want to do something, he said, sitting up straighter. For him? For you? Anything. You're doing it, I said. You're here. He looked unconvinced. I hesitated, then rose and returned with a manila envelope. Inside were the trust papers, unsigned, unfiled, but real. I hadn't brought them to the bank yet. I wanted to see Ethan's face first. I handed it the folder to him. He opened it, brows furrowing, read the first few lines, then looked at me, alarmed. Grandma, what is this? My plan, I said simply. This is everything. The house, the cabin, even the savings accounts. Yes. But why me? His voice cracked. Why not Mom or Uncle Peter? I could have said many things. I could have talked about their absence, their cruelty, their parties and excuses, but I chose a different truth. Because you're the only one who came back without being called. He stared at the papers, then set them down gently as if afraid to break something. I don't know what to say, he murmured. You don't have to say anything. Just remember who you are and remember what love looks like when it's real. His eyes were wet now. He wiped them with his sleeve like he used to when he was a boy and didn't want anyone to see he was crying. We sat there for a long time, not speaking, just being. The way George and I used to sit in the evenings. Two people who didn't need to fill the air with sound to feel close. As he was leaving, Ethan turned to me at the door. If I come over next weekend, could we make pancakes again? I smiled, full and soft for the first time in days. We'll even use the good syrup. Celia showed up the next morning. I knew she would, not because she missed me, not because she needed comfort, but because I had stopped answering her messages. She arrived without warning, the tires of her black SUV crunching the gravel too fast, like she was late for something more important. She didn't knock, just walked in like she always used to, like the house still belonged to her in some invisible way. Mom, she said, dropping her oversized handbag on the hall table, I've been trying to reach you. I didn't get up. I was folding laundry, slowly, deliberately, matching socks like it was the most important task in the world. I've been busy, I said. She scoffed softly. Busy with what? I didn't answer. She walked into the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water without asking, and leaned against the counter like she owned the walls.